Hello and welcome to this video. In this video, we'll talk about variables. But before we talk about variables, let's recall algebra expression that we used in math. In algebra, we used to say something like x is equal to 4, y is equal to maybe 6. In Python, we consider this x and y as container for storing these corresponding values. And we refer these containers as variables. Now, a variable is just a container for storing data values. You can also consider these values as the actual data that's stored in a computer memory location, and the corresponding variables, consider them as a label for that memory location where the actual data is stored. Hence, a variable can also become a name that is associated with a memory address containing an actual data. Let's try to add these x and y values. If I try to add x with y, when Python is executing this line of code, it will replace this x with the value that is stored within the x variable, which is 4. And it will add that 4 with the value that is stored within the y variable, which is 6. So Python will replace these variables with the values that are stored within the variables, and it will add those values. So let's store whatever the outcome of this addition in a variable called z or z, whatever you can call it. So this z will store the addition of this x and y values, which is 4 plus 6. And if you try to print that z variable, it will give us the outcome of 4 plus 6, which is 10. In Python, not only can we store numbers in a variable, but you can also store textual data in a variable like this one, Ali. And we call this textual data strings. A string is any text that is either surrounded by double quotes or single quotes. And we also have number data types. Number data types in Python is categorized into two. A number in Python is either an integer, which is just a whole number, whether positive or negative, or we also have floats. A float is any number that has a decimal point, like 4.5 or 4.3, 4.1, whatever. So any number that has a decimal point, whether positive or negative, in Python, we call that number a floating point number or just a float. We also have Boolean data type in Python. Boolean data type evaluates either to true or false. So Python first checks a condition. If that condition evaluates to false, it will return false. If that condition evaluates to true, it will return true. Let's say we said something like 1 is greater than 5. We all know that 1 is not greater than 5, and this is not true. So Python will be like, is 1 greater than 5? And it will be like, no, that's not true. And it will return false because this condition evaluates to false. And let's say we stored whatever this condition evaluates in a variable called a, and try to print that variable a, and run our file. So Python will return false because this condition evaluates to false, and 1 is not greater than 5. Let's try a true Boolean statement like 1 is greater than 5. We all know that 1 is greater than 5, and this is true. So if we run our file, Python will return true because this condition evaluates to true. We can also specify the data type of our values when we are defining it to a variable. Let's say, as we know, that any number with a decimal point is of type float. So we can specify the data type of that number by surrounding it with the float keyword or the float function. We can also surround our whole numbers with the int function. As we know that any whole number is of type integer, and this int is denoted from the word integer. We can also specify our strings or our textual data by surrounding it with str, which stands for strings. Also our booleans, any condition that evaluates to either true or false, we can surround it with the bool keyword or the bool function, which stands for booleans. And this is a valid way of writing our Python code, and we will not encounter any errors when we run this code. If you don't explicitly define the data type of our values, Python will do that implicitly behind the scenes whenever we define a value to a variable, and it will convert that variable or that value into its corresponding data type. So it will first check, is this a text or a number? If it's a text, it will convert into its corresponding data type, which is a string. If it's a number, it will convert into its corresponding data type, whether integer or a float. Let's say, for example, you have defined a variable lang, which stands for language, and assign it to a value Python. So if you try to print this lang, it will give us the value that's stored within that variable, right? Wait for a while. Yeah, it will return this Python value that's stored within the variable lang. So, and this boolean is coming from, this true boolean is coming from this. Let's just comment it for now. You can also check the data type of any value that Python has implicitly defined behind the scenes by using the type function. And whatever you specify within this parenthesis of the type function, Python will return to you its data type. For example, if you want to check the data type of this Python function because you have not explicitly defined its data type, and Python will do that behind the scenes. If you want to check its data type, you can access it through this variable length and specify that within the parentheses of our type function, and Python will return to us its data type. Let's print out that data type by using the print function. So if we try to print that data type and run by running our file, Python will return to us str, which means string. So the data type of this value has been defined implicitly behind the scenes immediately after assigning to a variable. We can also check the data types of our other variables x, y, and r by printing it down here. Print the type of our data type x, and I can copy this for our data type y and r and replace this with our variable y, also for our variable r or a, whatever you call it. If I run this file, you're going to print the type of this variables. It is returning this string first, which is coming from our variable length that has this variable Python text. This float is coming from our variable x, which has a number with a decimal points. This integer is coming from our variable y, which has this whole number 6. And this boolean is coming from our data type r, which has this boolean condition. And I hope you learn how to use this type function to check the data type of any value.